With cold weather, one of everybody's favorite foods is stew. Stew and soup. These are traditional wintertime foods. Well, today we're going to do one that uses a lot of the vegetables that you may have either fresh or frozen left from your garden, and beef, one of Oklahoma's favorite foods. What we have here is beef stew with roasted vegetables. So we're going to put it together in a little bit different way than normal, and in that opposed to having everything in the pot on the first day and letting all the flavors meld overnight so that it actually tastes better on day two. We're going to cook part of it in the Dutch oven and part of it in the oven and blend those together, and so it's actually going to taste pretty darn good on day one. I'm going to start the burner here and see if we can get it hot, and then to that I'm going to add about 1 teaspoon of olive oil. Now, if you have other kinds of oil, that's fine as well. And then into that, I have a pound of chuck that I've cut into about 1/2, 3/4 inch cubes. Now, using chuck, of course, is going to take a little bit more time than if you use other methods or other kinds of meat because you have more connective tissue. There are a lot of muscles going lots of different directions, and that means that you're going to have to take a little bit more time to remove as much of the connective tissue and as much of the fat as you can. But the bonus on this is that the meat is going to cook up very tender. It's designed to be a meat that uses moist heat, which stewing is definitely one of the better examples of that. And it's much less expensive than some of the more expensive cuts that we sometimes use for stews because they're very lean and easy to work with. Now I'm also going to add 3 cloves of garlic. They're fairly large, but I'm not going to do any work to them. All I had to do was peel them. I want them intact and whole. And what's going to happen after this has simmered for about an hour, we're going to find that they get very, very soft, the same as if they had been roasted in the oven, and they will basically break apart when you do the final stirring at the end of this time. Once you get this well browned, you can go ahead and drain off the fat if you want to. However, I trimmed it very well and we only used a teaspoon, so I'm going to leave that fat there. It was a very nice olive oil and I want the actual flavor blended in. To that, I'm going to season it with 1½ teaspoons of dried thyme, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and about 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. And then I'm also going to work on keeping the fat and the sodium down somewhat by using a can, or you can either use your homemade as well, a can of low sodium, low fat, fat-free beef broth. We're simply going to bring that back up to a simmer, and we're going to let that simmer for about an hour until the meat is nice and tender, and that will depend, of course, on your actual piece of meat, how large you cut the pieces and how much connective tissue you actually trimmed away. But we just want it to simmer covered. And you notice I've got a fairly large pot here, and at this point in time, if you wanted to use something smaller, you could. There wouldn't be a problem with doing that. The reason I've got a large one is because eventually we're going to add the rest of the ingredients to this, and I want to have plenty of space for that. Now I have one already prepared that's gone that far, and we're going to bring that back up. You notice at this point we've got the garlic is very, very soft, and you can actually just mash it into the rest. I'm going to turn that down to very low, and this one will just continue to simmer until we're ready for it. What we're going to do now is prepare the vegetables to go in. Now the nice thing about this is a lot of times you hurry, and you've got to do this and get it all in something at the same time for everything to work. But you do all the part with the meat ahead of time. In fact, you can do it several days ahead of time or even weeks ahead of time and put that much in the freezer. And then at the end you can go ahead and do the vegetables and have them ready to go. I've got 2 large red bell peppers, about 1 large onion that I've cut into chunks, and the idea is to try and get everything in pretty much the same size of piece. I got about 1 pound of sweet potatoes, and how many sweet potatoes that will actually be, who knows these days. The ones in the market were anywhere from this size down to very, very small. Now if you're had enough sweet potatoes, one of the things that you can do is substitute either all or part red potatoes, the red skin potatoes. They're going to work in here very well also. They're not going to give the same sweetness, but they'll stay firm enough that if your family's not a sweet potato eating family, the white potatoes are also going to be very, very nice. One of the things you're going to lose, however, is this dish has about 400% of the amount of vitamin A that you need for a day, so you're not going to get that if you don't use the sweet potatoes. White potatoes won't do that for you. I've also got about 8 ounces of mushrooms that we're going to stir in here. And finally, I've got 2 teaspoons of olive oil and 3 teaspoons of balsamic vinegar. And to make sure that everything's well coated. And this is going to go in a 350-degree oven for 25 to 35 minutes, which will be about the time you need for the meat to be ready. Once you've roasted the vegetables, notice that they retain most of their color, and because they're roasted, you may get a little bit of browning on the bottom, but if you've used a shiny pan, that will be minimal. But they really bring out their sweetness by doing them this way. You probably need to toss them 1 or 2 times during that time period, and the way to tell when they're done is just test one of the sweet potatoes or the white potatoes with a fork or a knife, and if it comes out tender, then you're ready to go on to the next step. Once those are done, you can come back over here, and what we're going to do is thicken the stew a little bit. So we have 4 teaspoons of cornstarch, or 2 tablespoons and 1 teaspoon, and 2 tablespoons of water. We're going to stir that together as our thickener. Now, cornstarch is a little bit nicer to work with than flour because it's much easier to avoid lumps. Flour, you have to work a little bit harder. If you don't have cornstarch, however, and your recipe calls for it, you can double the amount of cornstarch called for with the substitution of flour. We're going to stir this together just enough to get that thickened. And if you decide you need a little bit more liquid, you can add it at this point as well. If you decide you need a little bit more liquid, if it's not enough by any means, go ahead and just add a little bit of water, or if you have some more beef broth, you can do that. What you want to do is bring this up to a nice simmer and let it simmer for about a minute to make sure that you have got all the cooking done and all the thickness out of it that you're going to, and also to go ahead and cook the starch, the raw starch flavor, away from the sauce. Okay, after that has simmered just a little bit so that you get that starch flavor cooked out, then you just need to add the roasted vegetables to this. Notice it's going to be a very thick stew. And when you're finished, if you serve this with a nice crusty bread and a tossed green salad, I think you're going to have a lot of people that are going to be very happy at your table. Now the vegetables can also be done up ahead of time, a day or so ahead, and then just held in the refrigerator until you're ready to combine them with the meat. And as I said, the meat can actually be frozen up ahead of time. Let's get a plate and ladle some of this out onto here. And as I said, this is extremely high in vitamin A, but it's also extremely high in vitamin C because of the red peppers there. And so you actually have something that's got about 200% of the amount of vitamin C that you would need for a day. And I forgot to do something here, so I'm going to just drizzle a little bit on this serving. What we have here is the other teaspoon of balsamic vinegar. So that would need to be stirred in, and then garnish it with just a touch of parsley. And you have something that I think is going to make a lot of people glad that it's actually cold outside. For Oklahoma Gardening, this is Barbara Brown.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.